So I'll talk about the differences between shared ownership leases and ordinary leases. And first, just to say that what you are buying is a lease. It's not a freehold of a property, so there is a standard form of lease approved by the Homes and Communities Agency. It is fair to say, though, that there are some differences between shared ownership leases and ordinary property ownership, and although there are lots of advantages to shared ownership and it's very popular, it's important to understand those differences. So just to go through some of the differences, the first is that in fact, you are in a very similar position to an ordinary housing association tenant, legally speaking, in that the type of tenancy you get is what's called an assured tenancy, even though you own a share of the equity of it. That might sound like a rather obscure thing, but actually it can have some important effects. And for example, it can make make it easier for a landlord to obtain possession. For example, if there are arrears, it's a slightly more precarious form of ownership perhaps than an ordinary property owner would have, and it's just something to be aware of. There are some other differences between shared ownership leases and ordinary ownership of flats and properties like that. Another difference is that there's no right as there is for people to group together and buy the freehold. So there's not that thing called enfranchisement that is quite popular with long leases on houses and the like. So that's a second difference. So what about when you want to sell the property, or if you want to use it as an investment, you want to sublet it? It's very important to note that it's not possible, or not legally, not lawful to sublet a shared ownership lease. So you have to be living there, and that's so then it's not possible to buy them as investments as it might be other flats. There are also some restrictions on sale of the properties. So this is the situation where perhaps you've bought 50% or 25% or 75%, that sort of thing, and part of it is still owned by the housing association. In that circumstance, the housing association has effectively got a right of first refusal to buy the property, and in some cases also to nominate a purchaser of the property. That, of course, can cause some delays in selling a shared ownership property, and there has historically anyway been some difficulty in the market with shared ownership properties, them not being as quick to sell and not being as easy to sell perhaps as regular leases. So that is definitely something to look out for. Another important thing to remember is that in terms of paying for the shared ownership lease, of course you have to pay any mortgage interest and capital repayments just as you would any other property, but you're also going to be paying rent on the part of the property, part of the equity of the property that you don't own. So you're likely to have two monthly payments to make instead of one. So you need to be aware of that. Because they're going to be flats in blocks typically, you're also going to have to pay a service charge as well. And one thing that people sometimes don't realise is that right from the off, even if they only own 25% of the equity, they're going to be liable for 100% of the service charge for that particular flat. And so that can be perhaps a hidden expense of shared ownership properties, which people sometimes don't realise. And really, just to conclude this, I mean, it is certainly true that the government is very keen on promoting shared ownership and have expanded the scope of it. It's still a very minor part of tenure. I think it's only perhaps 1.5% of all properties are shared ownership, but this is something which has been which has been very much pushed as getting people into home ownership. I think it's fair to say that there are still some issues of complexity, and perhaps they are slightly more inflexible things than conventional property ownership, but nevertheless they do provide a valuable opportunity and are very oversubscribed when they do come up to offer. So if you are a shared ownership flat owner, or you're thinking of owning and you have any questions, then do contact Anthony Gould's housing or conveyancing team, and we'll be very happy to help.